Well, welcome back. I hope you had a really lovely lunch. It's my pleasure now to open up the next session, which is beginning with a leading indicator and will then be followed by a discussion, which I'm really looking forward to as well, about the future of jobs. But to do our leading indicator, we are delighted to welcome Sam Palmisano, who has spent the last decade or so leading IBM through a most remarkable corporate transformation, and is himself now transforming out of running IBM into freedom. And he's given up his one of his first tasks since he's become a free man is to come here today and stimulate our thinking about the future of business in a globalized world. So I'd like, with no further ado, to welcome Sam to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right. Thank you. It's good to be a free man. It's actually very liberating to no longer be a public employee of a public corporation. So I guess I'm free to speak. I don't know what that means, quite honestly, after being restricted for so many years and surrounded by lawyers. I think it'll be a big, major cultural transformation, maybe harder than driving IBM's transformation. But I'm great to be here. I'm pleased to be here this afternoon. Matthew, thank you for your kind introduction. I thought what I would do is offer a perspective for you all on the changing competitive context of both the majors of the developed world as well as the developing world. I think it's one of an enormous opportunity and tremendous areas for innovation, contrary to what we hear this time of year in a political season. But it also represents the opportunity for prosperity and societal progress. However, we're not going to capture those opportunities if we really don't spend a moment to understand the new arena that we're all playing in, because it has changed quite dramatically. I mean, I think it's well known and it's been noted that the economies of the world since the 1980s have been shaped by really three major shifts. One being an embracing of open trade, two is stability of the political environment, and then the last is the digital network revolution, a world that I was personally involved in for most of my working life. But when I talk about the network world, I'm really not just talking about connectivity. I mean, it goes well beyond Facebook and Twitter and smartphones and tablets. And many times I've referred to that's sort of the eye candy of what's really going on. These developments are exciting, but it's just kind of it's the sparkle. It's not what's happening. If you look below it, if you watch really what's going on structurally within the world, it's being pervasively instrumented, it's interconnected, it's intelligent, computation is being infused into things, both that you would never think of as computers, both devices and organisms and the like. And it's what IBM has been referring to as a smarter planet. So when I talk about that, let me give you a feel for some scope. You know, some of these things I think you've heard a million different times, but other things you might find a little bit, another slant on the data. There are approximately 2 billion people today on the internet. Clearly you know that there are 1 billion people today on Facebook, so be it. But this number is really even greater when you think about what's going on with the interconnected objects. There's a trillion interconnected today objects and organisms in the world that are on these networks. And many people have referred to this as the Internet of Things. There are 1 billion transistors for every human being on the face of the earth. Intelligence is now embedded in the systems and services that we deliver, physical goods, how they're made and they're sold, everything from people, freight to oil, water and electrons, to really how we work and live every day in our lives. But in addition to that, there's also vast amounts of data that are being created out there. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Last year, there were 1.8 zettabytes of data that was created. By 2015, that's 75 zettabytes. To put that in perspective, that's 1 followed by 21 zeros. And then thanks to computation and analytics, we can make sense of the data in something like real time. And it enables a very different kind of insight and foresight in different ways of making decisions, and quite honestly, different ways to govern, to manage, to teach, to all the things that we do in the world. This has significant implications into all those operations in those areas. That's the field we're playing on today. The door's opened, in which vast swaths of the planet are now entering this global economy. For emerging markets, when you think about this, quite honestly, I think it was relatively straightforward. And we see the effects of that and the progress associated with that. If you dropped your protective tariffs or embraced digital IT, in some cases you ended your civil war, you grew. If you did some combination of those three factors, you grew exponentially. So this created enormous, and I would say irresistible incentives for investment, manufacturing, and for jobs to move all around the world. In the process, it lifted about 500 million people into the middle class, reordered industries, and rebalanced economies. I think you'd agree in a macro sense that was a very good thing. Our planet now runs on global supply chains, not just for products, but also for services. It's increasingly difficult to characterize what is an import and what is an export, since so much of what is imagined and produced and delivered is done so many places around the world before it becomes an integrated service or an integrated product. It's hard to say what is offshore if you have no shore. So what is offshore? So does this mean, that's the implication, that there's a stable regime of global integration that's been put in place, and now the path to progress is clear, and everybody understands their roles and how to play? I think if you listen to the most recent debates, you conclude, hardly is that the fact. The fact is that the developing world has reached the end of what I would call, and many people have called, the easy path to rising GDP and per capita income. Some call this the middle income trap. The fact that it's a lot easier to go from low income to middle income than to go from middle income to high income economies. Simply put, growth markets have plucked the low-hanging fruit of Global Integration Act 1. They face a radically more competitive arena as they go to their next phase. And let's call that Global Integration Act 2. It requires higher degrees of regulation, higher standards. There are higher expectations for everything, from product and service quality to working conditions to protection of intellectual property and, yes, rule of law. Notice, not higher, not lower. In other words, to succeed in this new global economy, you need to take your game to a new level. The situation is creating an intense competitive dynamic on a scale that many people don't yet grasp. The playing field may be flat, but it's not at sea level. The game is moving to a higher plateau, and I'll argue the plateau of innovation. Conversely, this moment presents exciting new opportunities for the developed world, as many of those capabilities and the skills that are required to be successful in an innovation-based global economy are deeply ingrained in the world's mature markets, deeply ingrained in the US and countries in Europe, as well as Japan. However, there's a catch. These economies must also tackle some very big challenges if they're to compete successfully in the years ahead. I mean, that's because the past 3 decades, something else was going on. In addition to a technology revolution and global integration, there was something more at play. The world's more mature economies were piling up massive deficits, not just financial, which we all read about every day, but also deficits in competitiveness. Their populations were aging, their infrastructure rusting, education systems were becoming out of date. Public services and governments were not keeping pace with change at a rate necessary to be competitive in the long term. And now the bill has come due. For all those deficits, it all came due at once. Just as all emerging markets are being hit at once by the middle income trap, so the developed world finds itself having to address huge structural overhangs with urgency. And thanks to a continuing weak economy, it only gets worse as we look out in time. I mean, it might be appealing to think that you can postpone the day of reckoning, but it's not a serious option. As we say, the great game of global competition will not wait to start league play when the mature world gets its house in order. So, in this new world that I've tried to frame and describe quickly, how do you compete? How do you advance your society on both dimensions, the mature and the emerging? So I think there's some guides that I'd like to share with the audience before we get with Matthew and do a little Q&A. First, I think it's straightforward, and that you have to have some unique value. You have to do something better than others. That's how free trade and comparative advantage work. So cities and countries have to address this basic question, the question that we deal with in business every day. What is your differentiating value proposition? Cities, countries, economies that will succeed will have clarity on that point, kind of an economic and societal innovation that they can do uniquely well beyond natural resources. The qualities of their culture, their knowledge base, their business environment, their infrastructure that make them stand out in a competitive marketplace will attract talent and investment. It will migrate there because of the opportunities that it represents. In a truly globally integrated economy, investment, work, and people flow like never before. So the question for any country, company, or city is, what will cause it to flow to you? Second, every society must simultaneously invest in the future and improve its competitive muscle tone. As we know, debates rage on today about austerity, and without question, it needs to be dealt with seriously in a grown-up way, and we have to address our financial deficits. And both the public and private organizations have a role in this. But you can't cost-cut your way to competitiveness. You can't transform a multinational like IBM if you only focus every day on cost. Winning on a flatter, higher playing field will require increased investments in key areas: infrastructure, education, deep research. Let's pick one example. The Society of American Engineers of Civil Engineers estimated that the investments required for the U.S. physical infrastructure are $2.2 trillion by the year 2014. But it's not just about investment in technology and infrastructure. We must also adopt our policies to nurture and promote an innovation-based economy. Every country and city must be able to tap into global supply chains. Talent pools must have collaborative relationships. No one company or no one geography has enough talent or resources to do it on their own. They have to create around that base creative things and then drive from that indigenous value. And in turn, you have to have greater flexibility in how you operate. You have to have smarter labor, smarter trade regulations. All these systems need to be revamped if you're going to be competitive, either as a city, country, or company in this integrated economic world. Third, you have to remember that there's an end, A-N-D, in R-N-D. What am I talking about, other than having some fun with words? When we talk about R&D, we sometimes conflate the two. They're different. The history of my industry, information technology, has been driven through truly by big breakthrough ideas. They came from deep research, Bell Labs, Xerox PARC, IBM Research, Stanford, MIT, institutions like Lawrence Livermore, just to name a few. The great modern age of industrial scientific research was built by institutions that pushed the boundaries of knowledge and that stuck to it in good times and in bad. Now, it takes a kind of an institutional patience to pursue fundamental research. Its payoff usually doesn't come in a quarter or a year or an election cycle for those here from public service. It comes sometimes in decades, if it ever comes at all, and sometimes the benefits of derivative works different than the core work you thought you were going to start with in the beginning. IBM and many universities are convinced that fundamental research will become more important than ever. So when you hear people claim that all the basic science has been done and that IT has become a commodity, don't believe them. They're all looking at the past. It's just the opposite. We're seeing innovation more out of the back office, more snazzy new gadgets and games than we have in the past. But it's the interaction of all these things and all these systems that are going to transform our planet and our industries and how our societies actually run. Finally, let me add a word to the key role, the critical role of government. You might not expect to hear from a chairman of a large, enthusiastically profit-making enterprise like IBM, who's existed for more than 100 years. But one thing about our century is we've learned that the evolutionists taught us that markets are not enough alone. Although as much I'd like to wake up in the middle of the night and say, please, I don't need any more government partnerships at IBM, but we also understand that government has a crucial role to play. When people argue about bigger versus smaller government, I believe that's the wrong debate. I think it's wrong-headed. The key issue for government as for business is it has to become smarter. And by that, I don't just mean digitizing their websites or their services or putting up more interaction points for citizen interaction through 911 numbers or the like. I'm talking about the need for deep subject expertise infused in everything that government does. Think about it. All the services and functions that government is entrusted to provide for the public, for us, are changing. Consider public safety. We used to measure crime-fighting capacity by the size of the police force and their equipment or their tools. You might refer to that as guns or tasers. But more and more police departments today are fighting crime with data. New York City, where we are right now, is one of the safest large cities in the world. And you say, well, how can that be? Why is it? Well, they embrace data. They learned how to analyze it. They reconceived its missions, and they developed skills around that. And in fact, we helped them build the crime center many, many years ago. It's why they're so effective at what they do today. But then you stand back and say, well, is this approach to public safety being taught in our schools? Are people engaged in that career being trained in these types of capabilities? The answer is no, but they will be. Take traffic management. It used to mean more roads, more subways, more trains, more what have you. But then you look at the work going on in Helsinki and in Stockholm, where they're reducing congestion and lowering carbon emissions, increasing the use of public transportation. They're doing it through data, through pricing, through economic incentive in the systems. Again, are those types of transportation systems being taught today in schools? And the answer is no. But again, they will be as this continues to evolve. How about emergency responding? There's ample evidence that after the fact, there's heroic efforts and tons of scrambling that goes on, whether it's natural disasters or terrorist attacks. But what about another approach? Consider Rio de Janeiro. Cities are actually building smart operations centers that integrate all forms of data across their entire enterprise to get ahead of trends, mudslides, rainstorms, what have you, riots, and plan for that. Now again, are city planners being trained to use these kind of capabilities? And I'm repeating the answer, of course not. But it will be. The list goes on and on. Every area of government, every field of service, business, and society is going to be transformed before our very eyes. Clearly, we need the most intelligent experts in the world helping society form these kinds of systems that are smart and sustainable. So I really think that when we hear about the debates about the size of government, it is the wrong debate. Government has a very important role, but it also needs the capability to fulfill that role as we move forward into the future. So, I'm optimistic. I'm very, very optimistic. Maybe it's easier when you don't have to make quarterly numbers. For the first time in 12 years, I haven't had to do that the past 9 months. So it is a nice feeling. But nonetheless, 48 record quarters were enough for me anyway. Let somebody else have some fun. Young, energetic woman, and a lot of energy, more than I ever had at that age. But fundamentally, I'm optimistic because of the people that I've worked with. And I looked out. When you work in these projects in these cities and these states around the world, or provinces or provincial governments, what have you, municipalities, use your term you like, these people are driven to a pragmatism that they need to solve problems. And I've thought about this a lot. But if you're a police chief, you're a head of a school, you're a mayor or a governor or what have you, you don't have the luxury of ideology. I mean, you might get elected on ideology, but when you're governing, you have to have a safer city. You have to try to fix your schools. You have to deal with these health issues. You don't have the choice of ideology. It's not ideological. You have problems that you have to fix. And when you watch these people operate, they are very, very effective at gaining support in a collaborative, collegial way, getting the funding necessary, and actually going forward and transforming their systems. I also am optimistic because there's this huge natural resource that hasn't existed before. I mean, it's this idea of data being captured everywhere and how you influence. I mean, you all think of social media and pinpoint marketing and segments of the individual versus categories of a brand. Think beyond that for a second. Think of all aspects of life, not just the social media elements to this. It's going to be like discovering the Western Hemisphere in the 15th century. It's going to be like steam power in the 18th century, or the industrialization of electricity in the 19th century. This is what it's going to be. It's going to drive massive innovation. And that massive innovation is going to create tremendous opportunities for both the emerging and the mature economies of the world. And those that take advantage of that can lead to a better path of prosperity. Those that resist that will find themselves, I think, being defensive and only blaming their predecessors. So again, I am extremely optimistic. I think there's tremendous opportunities on both sides of these discussion points. And with that, Matthew, I'll turn it over to you, please. I was looking
Come and have a seat.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Sam, for that very broad and optimistic vision. And I recall 2 visits I made to Bangalore over the past decade. About a decade ago, I remember sitting with Nandan Nilekani, who was the head of Infosys, and he sketched on a piece of paper the value chain in your industry and explained how he was going after you guys from the bottom, and that it's much easier to climb up the value chain than it is to defend yourself from the attack from below. And then I remember going back about 4 years later, visiting IBM, visiting a lot of the firms there, and essentially hearing that IBM had out-Indianed the Indians, that you had essentially responded to that competitive threat by doing the Bangalore thing better than, or as well, at least as well as, or better than the locals. And so, I mean, it did seem to me that was a critical moment in IBM's story and the story of your tenure at the company, and you turned it around and you saved the company and put it on a path to be worth more than it's ever been to its shareholders. And so I suppose as a capitalist and as a shareholder, it seems to me this is an entirely positive development. The question I want to start with is really to bring it back to America and the debate that's going on in politics at the moment about that whole process of globalization and offshoring and so forth. And I suppose the question I want to start with is, you know, it's good for shareholders, but is what's happened at IBM, is that good? And IBM reflecting a broader show. Is that good for America? You as an American, do you feel that that's been a good process for America?
I actually have a very strong belief that the economic integration is good for America and is good for the world. Because if you look at it factually, and we actually did a study, and you look at say if you're domiciled, and I can use the IBM as a case study, in the United States, right, or in Great Britain or Germany, where have you, and you engage in the global economy, for every dollar that you generate in those operations, you generate 6 in your domiciled location. The people that did the study were Peterson and Kaufman, so I mean, I'm dated, so, and I am old these days, so bear with me. If you're going to quote it, you might check with the guys with the facts. But conceptually, it was about, say, 5 to 7, 6 to 1. Because if you look at everything an enterprise touches, it's not just about manufacturing. Of course, it is manufacturing, but it's your supply chain, it's your vendors, it's your research organizations, it's the university relationships, it's everything that goes on within that. IBM is an example. Yes, we globalized all of our services delivery. I mean, India was one that was a threat that spurred us along. We had to respond to a competitive threat. And I said, well, ask him how he's doing today. He went, well, not so well. IBM's doing much better than I am. But you know, that's history now. But you have to respond. Nations have to respond to competitive threats. Sitting around being idle is not a good course to the future. But at the end of the day, as you do that, you leverage the R&D. How do we do it? We just didn't add a lot of people in India. We leveraged the IBM research facilities with the people in India. But where are those research facilities located? The largest research facility for IBM happens to be right up the road in New York called Watson, where we developed the Jeopardy machine, or Almaden in Silicon Valley on the West Coast. They're the 2 biggest research centers for IBM. And yes, it's globalized in Zurich and other places of the world. So you're leveraging this global capability. The other thing from a societal perspective, you can argue all sides of this. I've argued it in the emerging countries, I argued in the mature countries, that your society doesn't have a captive audience, or you don't have all the great ideas of the world. You don't. And so if you really want to advance, you have to engage the world. And again, I'll use IBM as an example. Our best ideas come out of collaboration with our development organizations that are all around the world. They're not, I don't know what they are. They're American, are they European? They're everything.
There is a sense in which, as you engage with the outside world, you disengage to some extent with your home country. And there's this sort of description now of the integrated global enterprise that sort of hovers over countries and
that was me.
picks and
I wrote
chooses.
the piece, as you might recall, right?
So, but is that in that world? I mean, what is it therefore more reasonable for sort of presidential candidates to say, well, can we really trust these big business leaders when they tell us what they want and so forth?
Well, I mean, think about it. Let's go back and say, how do you solve the problem? I mean, it's very difficult to comment on election season because, I mean, people have a goal, which is to be elected. We have a goal, which is to grow profits. And so we have our goals. But stand back. I mean, can we stand back? 2 weeks, this will be over. Or 12 days now, it's going to be over. And then we're going to have to get on with work. So I say, okay, how do you solve the problem if you're going to get on with work? You got to fix this problem. I mean, after the speeches are given, is the U.S. more competitive today than it was 6 months ago? Did we stand up to deal with these issues, our education gap, our ability to create an infrastructure that's competitive with the globe? Have we dealt with any of that? So you say, no, of course not. We know that. I'm giving you a rhetorical question. So then it becomes, what do you do? And I think the only way to make progress is to get all the affected parties together and solve the problem. And that means government has a key role. The business has a very, very key role. We need, I mean, you can't be a multinational and have the G7 on their back. I mean, you can only complain about Europe so long, Matthew, right? I mean, it's not going to make you sustainable complaining about it. And, think of it, you got to fix it. So you need the universities because you need the talent pools. You got to fix the education problem. You have to create an infrastructure that's competitive. You have to deal with public policy issues that limit your ability to compete in the world. That's how you solve the problem. Now, I'm optimistic. I really do believe at some point in time, people will come together, because really it's people, it's not entities, because it gets down to people. They're going to come together and say, we are going to seriously work on solving these problems. And they will hopefully be persuasive enough to bring their societies along with them. Now, not to turn this into another speech, but that's the challenge for the political leadership. How do you bring your constituencies with you? Is it easier to demonize? It's easier to demonize. I mean, come on, I could say, you're a bad guy, Matthew. You wrote this piece called The Globally Integrated Enterprise in Foreign Affairs. You're just a capitalist, and that's all you care about. That's an easy statement. Unfortunately, it doesn't do anything to fix the problem.
So do you think there's any reasonable grievance underlying President Obama's discussion of companies taking jobs offshore?
I have no idea what that means. And it's an election year, nor would I even get near that kind of a comment. Ask me in 12 days.
No, but seriously, I mean, is there you've seen this process. Is there any cause for concern at all? I mean, for regular...
This is the way you should think about it. And I had the same conversation in D.C. with a Hopkins colleague of mine who was the moderator, and I had the same answer. That's the wrong question. It's the wrong question. What is the right question? Because our point was, you have all this money on your balance sheet. Why aren't you hiring? That's the wrong question. The right question is, why would a university, a business, an entrepreneur put money in your place? Why would they? And we're on TV, the room goes, ooh, they're on television. Everybody says, what does he mean by that? Well, let's talk about the value proposition of the United States of America. Rule of law, wonderful capital markets, protection of IP, great universities you can collaborate with to create research. You can drive an innovation agenda. It's a differentiated value proposition. So the discussion should be, how do you take that differentiated value proposition? Now, I would say that it's not the role of business to explain it to the government. They should be trying to figure it out themselves. But so be it. We'll help them. And then how do you do it, and how do you expand it? But that's the goal. Now, to have these other debates, to me, are quite honestly, it's wonderful. I'm sure in your business, because you're selling advertising, God respect you, it's going to sell more. You call them newspapers, we call them magazines when they're weekly. So anyway, you'll sell more of those, right? If you're on TV, you got a lot of political ads. This is a great season for the media industry. But again, I just asked, did you solve the problem? Did the problem that we're discussing, is it being solved in that position?
Okay,
and the answer is no.
So you've articulated some of the positives about America.
Right.
I mean, I find a lot of the time people, business leaders in particular, talk about how broken Washington is. And I would just like, firstly, your perspective. You've seen a lot of governments around the world.
Work with all.
How does America's quality of government stack up? I mean, do you feel it's been declining over the years relative to other countries? Where do you really admire as a government?
They're all about the same. I mean, people, they all have their own. I think you have to be fair to governments. They have a role, and a very important role for their societies. And so depending upon where they are positioned on this continuum, they're going to have their own different points of view.
So you don't feel Washington's more broken, less effective than it was 10 years ago? Or
10 years ago? if you, for the problems that we need to be solving, do you need legislation to solve the problems? No, you don't. See, this is the misunderstanding. Everybody assumes you need legislation to fix the problems I'm talking about. We opened schools in New York and Chicago called P-TECH. We completely redefined the curriculum. Mayor Bloomberg, Joe Klein, the chancellor of schools, he didn't have to go to the city council. IBM decided to do it, gave him some money, we opened the school. Ernie Duncan was there yesterday, he says it's the most successful school he's ever seen since he's been in the job. Didn't require anything. Required nothing. We took places in the Midwest, people that were impacted by the economic downturn, i.e. manufacturing workers. People said you can't train them for tech. We said, we think we can. We opened these services centers in Dubuque and Columbia, Missouri, sent them to community colleges, hired, 1,000 of them or so. They're productive employees. Didn't require legislation. Didn't require anything except for people coming together and going to work. That's all it took. So my argument is that's all it takes. Now, you want to make it so imponderable, right? So imponderable that nothing can get done, then yeah, come across with these big social programs. And then it's hard to get anything done. If your goal, I'll give you another example. If your goal was to improve the quality of health care and provide insurance for 35 million people, you did not need a bill to do that. We gave them a proposal that would have them insure up to 35 million people, reallocate $900 billion, and take quality up. It required nothing. No legislation. All it required was a meeting of the leadership and lay out the work and tell them to go do some things.
Okay, so let me just, our time is almost up, unfortunately. I mean, I would love to carry on much longer, but I mean, two short questions, short answers to. Firstly, if there's one priority that you would like to see from the new president or the re-elected president after the election is over, that would really help America's competitiveness in the world, what would your number one priority be? And the other question, if there's one lesson from from your business career that you would like to see adopted by government, what would that one lesson?
I think that the one lesson, and they kind of come together, is you have to come up with a common point of view of what problem you're trying to fix. You're not going to fix the problem called the competitiveness of a major country, any one of them, by the way. We work on all of them, unless you have a point of view of what your future business model is going to be. When we transformed IBM, we had a point of view of what it was going to be. You have to have a point of view, and you have to sell it. In my case, I had to sell to employees and to investors. If you're the political leadership, you have to sell it to your constituency. That's called your society, right? That's what you have to do. And then from there, I have a point of view, but I'm not going to be the future president of the United States, or the chancellor or whomever, right, or a premier. But from there, then you have to go on what I would say is earnest, hard work. And I've said a lot of the things in my comments. You have to develop skills that are required for an innovation-based economy. And no sense arguing about the structure of your schools. Generate the skills. You have to be able to say you're competitive from the infrastructure perspective. And that's technology, it's pipes as far as fiber, cable, et cetera. It's also your road systems for manufacturing base. It's all those things. You can't sit there and say, I'm going to create non-competitive social structures and then say, why is business not competitive and they're going someplace else? You cannot have social structures that burden economics. Now, so you have to, quickly, I know it's not going to sell anything in the media, but it's hard work, and you have to come with a point of view. Now, this will never get anyone elected. That's why guys like me aren't in politics, but thank you for your time.
On that note, Sam, thank you very much.